welcome back to Math in Minutes. This is a review video on previously learned concepts for 4th grade. We are talking about converting fractions into decimals. So previous learning of fractions, and now we're moving towards those decimals. So eventually that students can do percentages and work on stuff that they will need in the future. The essential question, this was taught, let me just write that here. It was taught on 12/12. It's been a while. I haven't been able to get a video up there, but I wanted to get it done. So this was taught on 12/12, the essential question for this day, and this is a requirement for the students. They have to write down that essential question. How can you record hundredths as fractions and decimals? All right, so requirement, students write down obviously the essential question. We talk about any new, this is still very zoomed in. We talk about any new vocabulary that we might need to learn. There we go. Talk about any new vocabulary that is in our essential question. We talk about what math we're doing, and we talk about what we have to do with that math. So we already know fractions. That's a previously learned concept. We've been working on fractions for a while now. We added decimals the previous day on December the 11th, so the students are already aware of decimals. And we have a new word in here that we have not learned, which is hundredths. So that is the vocabulary the students would have written down. I'm going to go revert back to our previous day's learning where we have this here. Zoom this out just a little bit. There we go. We have our place value chart. The children were to go back to this. I didn't have them draw it again. This was previous learning at the beginning of the year. This is what we added on the previous day, December the 11th. And we talked about tenths, and today we've added hundredths. So our vocabulary for hundredths, let me just put that down here because the students would have been required to write that down as well. Hundredths is two place values. I'll go ahead and write it out. Oops. Place values to the right. It's not two. It's the second place value to the right of the decimal. So that's the vocabulary. And what we would have been doing with this is we would have been recording, which for us in this particular means we would have been converting fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. So that's what the students would have discussed with us in our learning objective for the day's lesson, is that they should be able to do this by the time that they're finished. All right, so I'm going to add that here. Decimal point, place value, we know that that's our tenths. That was the previous day's learning. And now we are adding our hundredths. Now, this is important because we will be getting into money. The next lesson, we'll be talking about money and how money has two place values. So every day is a building block on a previous day's learning, in this, especially in this particular lesson. There's no jumping around. You learn one piece, and then you're going to build upon that piece to add something else to the mix. All right, so they did show a couple of ways to do this. So I am going to do a model, and this is going to take me a minute. All right, so one of the ways they showed, and the kids saw this in the book, I did not have them draw this out because this is crazy, but I do want to show what it looks like and what the kids see so that the parents are kind of aware. So this is previous learning. We learned about how to create a fraction based on a model. So I'm going to do this. All right. So this particular model is 100. 10 lines and then 10 across, so that's 100. So the number of boxes, the total number of boxes represents our denominator. So we would be talking about fractions with a denominator of 100 today only. And then the number of colored boxes on top represents our numerator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6 100ths here for this particular one. So we are doing the same thing we did on the previous lesson. It's a fraction. Fraction represents part of a whole. Decimal represents part of a whole. I have 2 zeros. 2 zeros means 2 place values, 1 and 2. 2 place values after the decimal point. Now, this is where children get confused. This represents the hundredths place. This represents the tenths place. So, since it's over 100, that 6, because it's only one digit, would go in the hundredths place. Now, because it's hundredths, we have to have 2. You automatically put a 0. All right? That's how that particularly looks. What happens, this is the misconception, is students do this. They do this, they get that part, they understand 2 zeros, 2 place values, they end up doing this and doing this, which is incorrect. Let me write it, incorrect. This is a common misconception. We need to understand that each place value represents a certain number, and if the denominator is 100, that number has to go in the place that represents the hundredths, and then you would put a 0 in all the other places. And that would be the same if we did thousandths, millionths, it would 10,000ths, it would be the same. You have to, whatever this denominator is, that numerator has to go in that place value. Now, if you're lucky, in particular, so let me do another example using the same model. Okay, so here I have a model, and that's represented by 100 because there's 100 boxes here. And then I have 12 colored in. So that represents my numerator. The process would still be the same. It's a fraction. The decimal and the line and the decimal point represents the same thing. 2 place values, 1 and 2, because there's 2 zeros. And since I'm lucky enough to have 2 numbers, that's really easy. This they usually get right. It is when it has a single digit on the top of the hundredths place that tends to be a mistake. So we would place it in there. We have 2 place values. We have 2 numbers. Perfect. It's really easy and simple that way. So one of the things, and this is the same thing as using a strategy. They call it the place value strategy. So they actually have you draw it out. They have the kids draw it out. So this represents our wholes, our tenths, our hundredths, and they have them draw it out, and they have a 12, so it would go 1, 2, and then put a 0 in the front. Either way, this 0.12 or 0.12, they represent the exact same thing. A hundredths in decimal form. So that is the that is what the kids learned. They also did the number line just to show that a fraction is equivalent to a decimal. So let me give you a few examples. I'm not going to make this video really long because it is pretty much the exact same thing as the other one. The only difference is that we have hundredths instead of tenths. Let me go to a new page here. So if I have 5 and 4 100ths, I would do this the exact same way that I did the other one. I have a fraction, so I need a decimal point. I have 2 zeros, so I need 2 place values. I'm going to mark this as 10 and 100 so I don't make a mistake when I have a single digit. You don't have to do this. This is just something I do to help keep myself focused. That 4, it's over 100, so it has to be over the 100. And if I don't have any other digits, a 0 is a place value holder, and all whole numbers go prior to the decimal point. So 5 and 4 100ths is equivalent to 5.04. They are the same number, they're just written in 2 different forms. This is what we're doing. Back to our central question, how can you record hundredths as fractions and decimals? And what we're doing is converting. So if I have 7.62, if I need to change this into a fraction, my whole numbers are my whole numbers, and sometimes it helps to cross them out. There's 2 place values, so it has to be over 100. and then I just put my decimal number on top. So very simple. Let me give you a couple of problems to work on. 6/100ths. Oh wait, we already did 6/100ths. 9/100ths. 4/100ths. 80/100ths. 7/14/100ths. 91/100ths. 15/100ths. So those are some practice problems. Again, this video is really short. It is basically the exact same thing as the previous lesson. We've just added a new place value. So definitely a building block. Thanks for watching, everybody.